Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. Let's get going. So today's webinar is regarding Windchill Administrator or Administration Best Practices. So if we look at the agenda, is a quick introduction of myself and Boundary Systems. Going to then review and discuss some of the, or review some of the best practices. I'm going to demonstrate some of those as well. And then finally, just some questions and answer sessions. Before we get going with that, I want to just quickly start the poll. I see that there are some people that said no, they can't hear me okay. Is this better? Is there something else I can do to make it louder for anybody? If there's any questions, you can type it in the questions or the chat section. Okay, I don't see anything popping up, so let's proceed. So my name is Johan Strydom. I'm a senior technical specialist at Boundary Systems. I've been at Boundary for I think about 1.5 years now, almost 2 years, and I've got a fair amount of experience in the PDC product range. I'm also certified as a Windchill implementer by PDC, as well as a certified trainer by PDC. Just a bit more about Boundary. So we have got strong partnerships with a variety of software vendors, obviously PDC, we're going to see today, as well as Solid Thinking, eTrash, and Autodesk. We've also got some large capabilities inside of Boundary itself regarding product lifecycle management, data management, design consulting, and so on. And you can also then just have a look at some of our customers that we work with fairly often. So Boundary has got several awards and accreditations. Some of those that I've mentioned already from the accreditation side. So we are a PDC Platinum partner with certified implementers, and we also certified trainers for Creo, Windchill, MathCAD, Architecture, and several of the other PDC product ranges. So I mentioned early on as PDC is our main partner, but we also have some of the others. So here's just a more extensive list of some of the other software partners that we have and products that we sell. I'm going to refer back to this one at at the end of the presentation. So if you need to get some more information, you can also get it then. So for any technical questions after the webinar, you can reach out to myself, Johan Strydom, or if there's any sales inquiries, sales@boundarysys.com, and also please visit our website and our YouTube channel where all of the webinars are posted as well for further review. So just what we're going to go through, another quick poll just to get some additional information from you guys, then going to have a look at Windchill Architecture, some help and documentation, where you can find performance information related to Windchill, as well as health and server statuses. Then looking at queues, indexing, workers. So those are the common problems we see that an administrator needs to handle. Also then looking at users groups and licensing, and lastly, Windchill Backup. So let me quickly start the next one. Cool. So it looks like the majority of you are currently using Windchill. And also the majority of you are the Windchill administrator. And then a quick last one. Okay, so that split is much closer to half has not attended and half has attended the admin training. Okay, so let's get into the webinar itself. So it sounds a little bit odd sometimes why I would start with the Windchill architecture when we're talking about best practices, but you'll understand when we get to the end. So at a minimum, Windchill itself is made up of several bits and pieces of components. You've got a database server, a authentication administrative directory server, the Windchill application server itself that uses a web server, and that's what connects to all that the clients connect to. So that's usually the minimum that you need for Windchill. That can be expanded or with optional components depending on your requirements, and these are not all of them. You can see that it can obviously, like I mentioned, expand into several optional components. So I'm going to quickly run through just all of them and what they are used for. So the database server itself, so that PTC supports Oracle and Microsoft SQL Server at the moment, and that is where all the relationship and metadata information that you see inside the Windchill interface are stored. Then the next one, the administrative directory. So Windchill comes bundled with a administrative directory called Windchill DS or Windchill Directory Service, and that is where the user information is kept and authentication is done against. So username, password, and things like that are stored there in most cases, and I'll get to why it's only most cases. And it also stores some application-specific configuration that Windchill uses internally. Then the next main component there is obviously the Windchill server itself, and even it is broken up into several subcomponents. So the server manager, method server, there could also be background method servers, and a embedded Apache servlet engine inside of there. So the way it works is the server manager gets the work in, it distributes it. So if you request something, it gets in, it then passes that on to a method server. So if there's more than one, it will decide which one it should go to keep them in balance. That one will perform the action and send the information back to the client for use. And that's why you could have multiple method servers and even a background method server. And that one is used then for execution of queues and processes. But as you can see, also mentioned, there's a web server in there. In most cases, that is Apache. And that is then used to present all the information that has been processed back to the client through the web interface itself. Next component is Enterprise Directory, and I mentioned when I spoke about the Administrative Directory, user information or authentication. So what you can also do is connect to a LDAP directory like Active Directory, that you use to log into your machine, the laptop, your PC, and have that same username and password connected to Windchill then the administrative directory will only be used for internal Windchill management, and all the user information will be stored in a separate place. So that's something that some clients use as well. Next optional component is indexing server. So PDC uses Windchill Index Search that is powered by Solar, and what that is used is to index the content of files. So if you, for instance, create a Word document or a PDF and you upload that into Windchill, the search indexer will basically read through the document and index all the words inside there. So you can then search for any one of those words inside the Windchill interface itself. So it's not only then name and number that is searchable components. Last one, second last one is the email server, and that is simply to send email messages from inside of Windchill to you as the end user to be able to select on a task or review a task with a link back into Windchill itself. Okay, and then the last one is the visualization worker, what that does, and that there can be several of those. And what it does, it usually got, in cases where you have Creo or managed Creo data, what it will have is Creo installed, as well as some additional software. It will communicate to the Windchill server and create viewables or lightweight representations of the data inside of Windchill. So for other CAD systems like SolidWorks or Inventor, you will have a similar setup, and you can also have that for Office documents using some other functionality, and they are all using in this case, grouped as visualization worker configurations or visualization workers. So just a quick different view on this, and this shows just the 3-tier architecture that can be used. So the client tier, where it's your client PC connecting to it, your application tier, where there's a web server, the application, the Windchill application itself, with the method server and server managers and all of those, the vault, meaning where the content physical files sit, and then the database. And then on the right-hand side is some of the optional components as well. So why would I mention this in administration best practices? The point of this is that there are several subcomponents as part of Windchill, and if any one of those are down or not functioning correctly or not performing optimally, it could have an effect on the end user experience. And all of those are items that needs to be looked at, monitored, or even checked. So a lot of the times we'll get a call to say that Windchill is down, And that could be any one of these components that cause Windchill to be down. It could be the database server where Windchill is actually trying to connect to it and it can't, or plain simple, just a web server. So there could be multiple reasons. So those are the type of components that needs to be looked at if there are any issues inside of Windchill itself. So now if we jump to some help and documentations. So I don't know how many of you use this, but the PTC support knowledge base is really very good. They've also in recent years expanded some of the functionality in there where if you search for something now, it will also search the PTC documents itself. It will search the communities, general articles, and so it searches across a very wide range of places to give you back information that you might be looking for. So that's definitely very useful for any administrator to do. Then if you prefer still using a document itself, on that same page, there's browse documentation, where there are things like the installation guide, a system administration guide, a configuration guide. There's a lot of documents related to Windchill available on that support page. And then obviously the quickest and simplest one is inside Windchill itself. If you select on quick links, help, and then Windchill Help Center, there's really a lot of information available in there. And what a lot of people forget about is anywhere inside the Windchill interface where there's a little question mark, that is all help related to the specific place where you are. Even in the administration areas inside of Windchill, there's that capability to quickly find information related to the specific area that you're busy administering. If we start looking at some performance information, so inside also the technical support knowledge base, there is a knowledge hub, so one support PTC support case where they keep all the Windchill performance related information with links to different versions of Windchill, subcomponents of Windchill, so things like the application itself, the database, Java, memory, even the operating system. It's covered a lot in there. Very useful to have a look at every now and then. The next one is the database itself. So obviously Windchill uses the database a lot to store all of those information and metadata links. So for both Oracle and the SQL Server, there are statistics that is kept inside the database, and those should be updated and recalculated fairly often. So as part of the backup script that I use, I actually do it every night as part of the backup process to make sure that the database also performs optimally, to give feedback to Windchill as quick as possible. And then the last one that I want to mention in there is the WCA, or Windchill Configuration Assistant. In older versions of Windchill, that used to be a separate utility. In the newer versions, it is built into Windchill, and as part of the installation, it runs. What that does is it looks at the database, the amount of memory on the server, what everything is installed on the server, and then optimally set some Windchill configurations for the environment that it's on. It's also very useful to execute that from time to time. So as data grows, as you create new products, as you add or remove users or access control policies, there are settings inside of Windchill for all of those things. And the configuration assistant will look at the database, see what's the information in there, and set the properties correctly according to the information that's available to it. Then if you want to look at the actual performance status of the Windchill server, so most of the things that I'm going to look at today is under the site menu, so you have to be a site administrator to look at that. But the first one there is the server status page. So in the server status page, there's some additional monitoring tools that I'm going to cover after this. What you can also see directly in there is how many users are currently logged into Windchill. So you know exactly what's going on. So for instance, if you know you have 50 users and that could log onto Windchill, and you start seeing performance issues and you connect to this and you see there's 30 users connected, then you know exactly it's because there's so many users currently active on the system that could be causing the issue. So it's good to have a look at those types of things. The next bit that's quite important to have a look at as well is the uptime, and you can see in here it is separate for things like the background method server. So in this case there's a single background and two method servers, so you can see the uptime for each one of them separately, because one could have started after the other or one could have crashed. So that's also quite good to look at from time to time. Look at the memory usage, and all of those that are blue are obviously hyperlinks. So you can select on it and then actually see a graph over time. So you can see, so for each one of these, in my example, two method servers and a background method server, you can allocate a specific amount of memory to them. And that heap is how much, what's the percentage of that memory that's currently being utilized. If that number starts getting high, you will definitely start seeing performance issues inside of Windchill. So you need to monitor that and also look at the task manager in combination with this to make sure that is it the complete server that's running out of memory, or is it only a specific part of Windchill itself. Next one is Java database connections, or JDBC calls, and those are the queries that Windchill passes over to the database. The database runs it and passes it back. So you can also in there start seeing if there are problems on either the Windchill side or on the database side. So like I said, like the statistics that might need to be recalculated, those could have a performance degradation on the database side, and you will start noticing that in that area. There's also specific tools and scripts that can be executed on both Oracle and SQL to gather information about the database with some recommendations on what to do to improve performance. The next one there is the LDAP server status. So in my case, the Windchill directory server. So how long it has been up and running, what's the connection information, are there any deadlocks available, any deadlocks currently in place. And then the last one at the bottom area, looking at file servers. So as I mentioned, the content files itself are stored usually inside the vault, and that makes the Windchill server itself a file server to itself. So there will always be one file server, but you can also have replication servers, and then you will have multiple listed there, and for each one you can see, is it connected, how long has it been available, when last has Windchill main server communicated to it. So all of those can be seen and tracked in here. So this is really a very good point for administrators to look at to see, are there any issues, performance issues, health issues inside of Windchill, and then start investigating more. So the next one I mentioned, going to look at those additional monitoring tools. So in there, some interesting things, I think. One of them is you can view the Windchill log files or the web server log files directly from a web interface. So you don't need to connect to the Windchill server to be able to see that. With what I mean with like remote desktop or something like that, you can see that directly in the web interface. You can even query in there for specific keywords that you might be looking for. Next one is log event history. So each event that occurs inside of Windchill will have a event type, so an error or a warning or a fatal or just information. You can see and filter by those type of events to, for instance, only look at error events in a certain time period and start investigating those. Then the last one that I'm going to cover over here is, once again, connections to the database. So in that view, you can see top being duration-wise calls to the database. So Windchill has formulated something, it's queried the database, it's now waiting for the database to respond back. And when the database responds back, Windchill keeps that information, and you can then see which queries specifically are causing or might be causing performance-related issues. So for now, done with, I think, performance, let's look at the next one, queues. So once again, under site, there's queue management. So the first one I always have a look at is sort on the severe or failed entries column and have a look at those. You can also see for each one of these queues, there's the information button where you can then select on it, investigate further to find what could be the cause of those severe or failed entries. And that will have another table with more information that I'll show to you during the demonstration. Something else you also have a look at is monitor the total and waiting entries, and especially if they are large, monitor them over time. So you might be, so in my example that I'm using here, my publisher QL or low has got 11,500 total and waiting entries. So if I come back in an hour's time and I see that number hasn't decreased, then I know there's something wrong with my publisher. And you can do, or should do, similar things with all the other queues to make sure that the information is flowing correctly through the system and everybody's getting the information they are requesting. As part of this, and in this case, my failed or severe one is the workflow propagation queue, has got 6, and the workflow user queue has got 1. And that brings me to the next bit of workflows. So how do you know if there's any issues with workflows, and how do you investigate it further? So also under site, but under the business administration area, there's workflow process administration. What you can do from here is firstly, select a time range that you want to search for. And that is from when to when was the process started or initiated. You can even do it by a specific context or user. The next one, and the default, and I just deselected it to be able to show this, is to, if there's workflows that's executed already and they closed, to filter those out. So you will only see the workflows that's got issues in it. Then the next one is, once you've found a process, and you might see, so in my case, they are all executed. But if you select on the node itself or select on the process itself, the bottom area in the node area will become active, and that will then show all the blocks inside the workflow that makes up the workflow. And then for each one of those, you can also then have a state that you can see and investigate further. So once again, if you select on the node, the bottom area will then become active with the expression, in this case, that was executed. And if there are or were any error messages on the right-hand side, they will be displayed, and you can use that then for further investigation on what's happening or what's causing issues inside of workflows. The next bit is indexing status. So that is only if the additional component of Sonar or Windchill Index Search has been installed. And that is to look at how many total items there are per each category inside the database, how many still needs to be published, indexed, sorry, how many is failed being indexed, and what's the total that was indexed. So from here you can start. So for instance, after a fresh install or an upgrade or data migration, you can start a bulk indexing that will do grab a lot of data at once and start indexing those. Otherwise, if once everything has been indexed, it will just execute on its own in the background and index as new data gets created. So the important thing is to monitor the remaining to make sure that gets less, and the failed, investigate those to see what issues there are. There's also a queue or queues specifically for these. So if there are any failed entries, they will be available inside of the Windchill queues, and you can then investigate them in there. Then the next optional component that I mentioned, and this is one that causes a lot of headaches for administrators in general, as it could have issues, and I'm just trying to highlight one over there. So your CAD workers, so those are the ones that process the CAD files and creates the viewables. So one place to definitely look at is the CAD agent status. Once again, also under site and utilities. So the CAD agent status, so have a look there. The agents should in general be either off if they're not working, or busy if they are working. If there are things like this fail to start, that definitely needs to be investigated. Another thing to have a look at is looking at publishing job statuses. So there is a drop down over there where you've got executing, waiting, successful, failed as a high level things. So what I usually look at is the failed jobs and then investigate, select on each one of them and try and see, especially if there are a lot of them, try and figure out what's going on. The bottom area will then display, and in my example I want to show you there's failure to retrieve a specific part. Okay, so why would that happen? That could be that the geometry itself cannot regenerate. So have a look then, can you open it in Creo in a normal session? It could be, we've had it all seen it before, where the client PCs were upgraded to a newer version of Creo, but the worker was never upgraded, so it can't open the newer version files. So there's a lot of those type of reasons why it would not be able to retrieve. But once again, just trying to open the file and research what's causing it. Something else that can definitely help is on the CAD worker itself, look at, and in my examples, fail to start or fail to publish. And those are then done on the CAD worker, usually in the Creo view adapters. There's a Pro setup folder, and there's 5 main files that get created. The std.out and trail.txt, the normal Creo files, where you can physically go and read what is causing the issues. So something like fail to start, that's usually caused by a Creo license not being available, and you'll be able to see it in those files. The worker and helper logs, and there's also, sorry, I didn't highlight that one, a monitor log. So those 3 is regarding the communication between Windchill and the worker itself. So if there are any of those type of issues, they will also be highlighted in there. So that's definitely a good place to have a look at this. The next area to cover that I'm very quickly mentioning is users and groups. So as an administrator, it's important to remove or deactivate users once they have left the company. There's several reasons for that. One is obviously they might still have, or might still be able to log in, especially if the server is available on the internet. to make sure those users are deactivated or removed. It also frees up an additional license, and I'm covering that in the next slide, is the Windchill licensing. In newer versions of Windchill, those are now enforced, and that obviously will free up licensing itself. And then just a quick mention around, while we're talking about users and groups, if you're using access control or changing access control a lot, remember to apply that access control policies to groups and roles rather than users. It can become very complex and difficult to manage and monitor if they are done at a user level. So the higher levels of administration you use, the easier it is to troubleshoot and also to change in future. Next one, Windchill licensing. So once again, site and then license management in there. So this license information in newer versions of Windchill is retrieved from PDC itself, where it will show the different modules that's been purchased and the quantity of license that's available, as well as expiration date if it is a subscription. Otherwise, it will say it is a perpetual license and it doesn't expire. So that's one useful place to look at fairly often and monitor. But a lot of times people want to know, so how many of these licenses are actually utilized? So do people actually use, for instance, the Project Link module? Is it something that's used or not? And there's a report available for that. So on the report tab, you can generate a report for, and there's a drop down there, 3, 6, 12 months, or specify custom dates. That will create quite a large HTML report for you, stating here at the top for the period, how many users. There's then for the different modules, how many active users, total licenses, licenses used in the bottom area, then per user, when was the first time they accessed the system, last time they accessed the system, and also which modules or license functionality that they use. And at the bottom area, then looking at the different license features and how many of those are utilized. So here's just a larger example to make it a bit more clear. So my own user, the first time I logged in, the last time I logged in, and the e-bill management license I've used 4 times. Things like the normal PDM link license, 32. So you can see then how many times the user uses specific functionality. So this is really a useful report to have a look at from a user and licensing perspective. Then the next one, Windchill Backup. So important, the Windchill database, or even the complete Windchill application needs to be backed up once a day at least, in my opinion, but the database as well. Just something to consider as part of that. There's 2 types in general of backups, a hot and a cold. A hot backup meaning that Windchill is running, so you don't shut down Windchill at all, so it's available the whole time. Some of the fallbacks or the bad things about it is that you can have inconsistencies in data that's being backed up, as the database might be changing while the backup is running. You could also get the vault in the database becoming out of sync. So similar thing with inside the database, you can also get outside the database and vault is out. Cold backup, obviously Windchill has been stopped, so the data is much more consistent and the vault in the database will be in sync. The next one is, and we're going through basically the list of all the different components, but yes, definitely the next important one is the LDAP database. It needs to be backed up daily as well. Windchill configuration, so inside of the Windchill folder itself. Things like property files, site.xconf, any customizations that are there should be backed up daily, or after each change. So if you don't want to do it daily, you can, each time you've changed something, let whoever does the backup know that it needs to be done. And then the indexing database, that can be backed up as well. There are, however, a lot of people that don't do it. And the reason being that can be recreated by re-indexing it. Also, the indexing in most cases do run fairly quickly. So recreating that is not necessarily such a big issue in case it's not being backed up. And then obviously the last one, the file vaults itself should be backed up as well. Okay, and let's jump over to the demonstration. So I'm logged in currently as an administrator itself. So as a site administrator, you should see this site tab. And like I mentioned, most of the things we looking at is under utilities, under the system and business administration area. So just a couple of things to mention while we are here. So I mentioned firstly that help information is available from here. So this is installed on the Windchill server itself. So you can see there the URL is still my local server. So even if you do not have internet access for some reason, but you have access to the Windchill server, it is on there, and there's a lot of information you can browse through different functionality you might be looking for, or search or look by different products or user roles and so on. There's really a lot of information available in there. One other thing is just this help little button. So that is context specific. So if I press help there, it will take me directly to the site administrator's page, what's available in there, once again with links to all the information, similar to the links on the interface itself, links to that additional information on there. Then the next one, the server status page. So that's the one I mentioned, where I can see the active users currently. I can see some additional monitoring tools. I can see how long Windchill has been running. So 4 days in my case. There's just one method server. You can see here I've got one file server. It's connected, so everything is good in this case. And all of these numbers are fairly low because the server has just been standing doing nothing. Like I mentioned, all of these are hyperlinks. So if I select on them, it will show me a graph of, in my case, looking at the method server memory usage, spiking at 15% earlier on and slowly going up as I've gone through the day. Similar thing to active users. So if you select on that one, once again, a graph where you can see over time how many people has been logging in, and you can select the time range in days, hours, minutes, so on. So for instance, if I want to see the last 99 minutes, it will very quickly filter on that then. Some of the additional monitoring tools that I mentioned. So if you have a look over there. So the log file viewer, let's start off with that one. So here I can then search or decide what I want to look in, the Windchill log folder or the web server log folder, or both. So you can select. You can search by file name, for instance. So if you know you're looking for the method server or background method server, you can also look for specific string inside of the files. Otherwise, if I just want to, for instance, see the log files without anything else, I can say I want anything that's basically a day old. And here I can see the log files in my Windchill logs folder. Also, if you select on any of those, you can see the physical log file itself. If you, for instance, search for a specific keyword in the previous window, it will highlight the specific log file, the row number, and the information specific to that. So it will find the information and also only display that specific information to you. So it's very quickly to go through the logs and get additional information without even connecting to the, to the physical Windchill server itself. The next one, let's look at that log event histogram. So plain simple, asking you to query for the last 6 hours anything where the severity was a warning. So I can see warning or higher. So I can see there were 2 ones, warning or 1 warning and 1 error. I can also make it, for instance, fatal or all, and any one of those you can then select on and get additional information. And there you can see in my case, it couldn't connect to get the newest license file. So very quick way to filter information to get to specific errors you might be looking at. Then the next one, the top SQL samples. So once again, a start and an end time. So I think the default is something like 6 hours. Just going to leave it like that and say okay. So I can see there in this case that I had, and I'm going to change that. Just to query some more information. Okay, so I can see there were, in my case, very few database calls. You can also see then the elapsed time for each. So with this specific call, it took 3.5 seconds and to execute. If I select on that, it will take me to the specific query, and I can then see what's the database query that was executed, when it was executed, how long it took, all the information that came back, as well as additional ones going back from there in time and what it did. Okay, so that's also quite useful to look at, especially just looking at the long-running queries. Then if we jump over to indexing, once again from here, the index administrator, I can see in there how many objects there are for each category, how many are remaining, what's the total. So you can see in my case, I've got 3,500 EPM documents, and they are all processed successfully. Okay, so looking at this, monitoring it over time, making sure that new items does get processed, and if there are failed items, investigating them through the queue that I will be showing you next. So back to utilities, under queue management. So a list of all the Windchill queues that are there. So as I said, selecting on these columns will sort on them. So I can, for instance, go and investigate this specific queue. So there are 6 failed entries or severe entries. So I can see over there, they are severe. These that usually has the entry args means it is an object that was deleted and it never removes it out of the queue. So those you can very safely go and delete. Please remember, it's only those you can go and delete. If you need to resubmit any, and you'll see it will start processing again now, that one basically held it up. So if I just refresh the page, so I can see there's another one severe. And if I now, what I can do is I can say reset those so they are not severe. It will change to executing. And if I once again just refresh the page, you can now start seeing, okay, those two are definitely errors. If you select on these, it will take you directly to the workflow process and highlight the item. And in my case, it's actually the first item. There's no other gray blocks. So that's the first item where it failed at and got stuck at. And then you can obviously go to the workflow itself and start investigating that further. So that's regarding just investigating queue entries itself. As I mentioned, looking at things like total and weighting and the differences between them, and monitoring that over time to make sure that items do get processed. Is definitely something to do fairly often. Then looking at some of the workflow items that I showed you, mentioned earlier on. So if I look at the workflow process administration and I search, let's do it for the last month. I remove that one and just do a search. So you can see in my case, there's nothing. So that's why for demonstration purposes, if I just do a search again, it will show me the open ones, the executed ones as well. If I then select on any one of those, it will bring out my full list of workflow nodes at the bottom area. I'll just close that down to get a bit more information. Once again, for any one of those, so there's the task complete change notice. If I select on that, I can see any expressions that might be in there. So let's look at that one. So there's a lock expression. That's what the expression is. And if there were any error messages, it will be displayed here on the right-hand side at the bottom. So definitely something to help you troubleshoot regarding workflow and workflow related issues. Now, if we jump into the worker agent and its related items. So worker agent administrator is the one I showed you guys. So from here, you can start and stop each one independently. There's also, if there's, for instance, a fail to start, you need to recover. What you can do is just selecting the reload button. It will requery the information from Windchill itself, the configuration file where all of this is kept, and then all of them will become in the state where they are now off, and can then hit, in my case, I'm just going to say start all again. It's going to try and start it on all the, so I've got 3 different servers in this case. It will try and start it on, and then after a minute or so, give me feedback on which ones were able to start, which ones were not. What's the status for all of those? Obviously, select a refresh, and it will update the information. Once again, want to mention the help on all of these little pages are available. So if you need any additional information, it will take you directly to the help center, explaining whatever is on the page and what actions there are and what can be done in there. Then as part of also the worker agent is the publish monitor. So monitoring things like, as I mentioned, the failed ones. Okay, so you can see in my case, it's actually related to a Windchill license that's not allocated, so it couldn't connect to Windchill to do it. So there might be different errors depending on what's obviously causing it, but plain simply just investigating, reading will give you a lot of additional information on what to do to solve the problem and get the publishing back up and running again. So this is the list that I referred to earlier on, executing, failed, successful, and so on. From here, if there are failed jobs, you can also right click and resubmit a job that might have failed. It will put it back into the queue and try and execute it again. So you can see there that one, it's executing again. It's trying to start on the specific worker that is first in the list or based on certain rules. We'll try and execute it on there. You can refresh and you can see the information will update. And again, in my case, it failed obviously for the same reason because I haven't corrected that yet. Then if we look at licensing, so Windchill license management, so there we have a separate webinar that covers Windchill licensing in full, but as an administrator, I think it's good to have a look at this from time to time. One thing is you can from here obviously see the amount of licenses that you have, when do they expire. If you select on any one of these hyperlinks, it will take you directly to the group and you can see who's all the users contained inside of that group. So you can see which users are available. You can also export that as a CSV file if you need to keep it for reference or if you want to compile a report or anything that is available from there. Then if we look at the report itself, so if I want to see that report that I showed you during the presentation, so my license usage for the last 3 months. If you have a lot of users, that might take some time to execute. So just warning. In my case, obviously, don't have a lot. So if I have a quick look at that, and you can see a bit more in detail what I was referring to. So it's reporting for this specific period. There's 9 users. There's 4 recently active, 2 deleted users in this time frame. The different active users for each of the different modules. Then per user, what functionality that they use, and then per feature at the bottom, the total available and the amount of users that's inside of that specific license groups. Okay, and that was all that I plan to cover, unless anybody has got questions. I see there's one that came in. How can you see which current users are currently in the system? Unfortunately, that is not a very simple thing to do. One of the things that you can do that helps is, and that depends on obviously the amount of users that's inside of the system. In the bottom area, there's security audit reporting. And I can, for instance, say today, I want to see all events, all context, all users, and so on. And if I preview that, here I can see the user, the date and time that they accessed a specific context. So you can very quickly see at the top of the list will be the users that's currently active in the system. Unfortunately, this is the quickest way to get that information. There are other ways using a report, a Windchill report that you can create that can query very similar information to what you can see here, where you can actually then use an input of date and time. So the input might be from now for the last 30 minutes, because that is what the Windchill uses as a logout event. If you haven't been active inside of Windchill for 30 minutes, it will automatically mark you as logged out. So you can create a report for that, and that can then be executed to see which are the users currently active in the system. Any other questions at this stage? Okay, I don't see anything else coming up. So once again, just a reminder, for any technical questions you might have after the webinar, please reach out to myself, jstradum@boundaryassist.com, or sales inquiries or questions, sales@boundaryassist.com, or visit our website or our YouTube channel, where all of this will be recorded and available, as well as all our previous webcasts or webinars. Thank you very much, everybody, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.